Welcome to a journey through one of the oldest and most mysterious civilizations in human history, India. A land where a glorious past blends into the haze of the modern world, where myth and reality coexist like two sides of the same coin. India today, the most populous country in the world, a hub of rapid technological advancement, is also a place where ancient social structures, enduring injustice, and persistent religious conflicts still remain. From the vibrant beauty of the holy festival to the faint echoes of ancient scriptures, India is a multi-layered tapestry, both wondrous and full of contradictions. And to understand why this land looks the way it does today, we must travel back in time to the beginning of a civilization that has lasted for more than 5 millennia. The story begins not with just one nation, but with an entire subcontinent, ancient South Asia, what is now India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Around 5,000 years ago, a civilization quietly blossomed along the banks of the Indus River at the border of modern-day Pakistan and India. The indigenous people whom modern researchers refer to as the Dravidian were the first to lay the foundation for Harappan culture and advanced urban civilization, with renowned city-states like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. They not only built cities from fired bricks early on, but also designed underground drainage systems and water pipelines, something that contemporary civilizations in Egypt, Mesopotamia, or China had yet to achieve. Strangely enough, while the ancient Egyptians were constructing pyramids, the Dravidian were quietly developing infrastructure with a modern appearance. Moreover, they dyed fabrics, wore brightly colored clothing, and used pictographic writing, all of this taking place thousands of years before the Common Era. However, the fate of this civilization took a different turn when a group of nomadic people from the northwest, whom modern historians call the Aryans, crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains and entered the Indus Valley. Unlike the peaceful, urban-minded Dravidian, the Aryans brought with them animal husbandry techniques, the ancient Sanskrit language, and a deeply entrenched belief in class division. Through centuries of conquest and assimilation, they gradually replaced the old city-state system and forged a new civilization, the Vedic Age, which laid the foundation for Hinduism and the caste system that still visibly exists today. During the period known as the Warring States era, state power in ancient India began to centralize, giving rise to an increasingly complex administrative system. Kings were not only symbols of supreme authority, but also the central figures in all major decisions. However, they were not the only ones who truly wielded power. Local nobles, also known as vassals, gradually took control of distinct territories and held real authority. Yet contradictions began to emerge. Under this governing structure, the people were forced to surrender most of their possessions to the Brahmin priesthood, who in the name of religion maintained spiritual and ritual dominance. Meanwhile, secular rulers, including kings and nobles, received only a small portion of the taxes collected from the populace. This injustice soon pushed two castes, the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas, into a quiet but escalating power struggle. And when the Aryan commoners belonging to the third caste began falling into poverty, losing land status, and eventually being relegated to the lowest social tier, discontent spread far beyond control. Amid this wave of discontent, a quiet yet powerful movement emerged known in history as the Shramana movement. It was an intellectual revolution initiated by the Kshatriya nobles themselves, those who had once been part of the ruling system. This movement soon blossomed into hundreds of new religious schools, each led by a king, prince, or scholar. Among them were sects such as Yamba Athich, Fija Yanapath, and most notably Buddhism, a school that would eventually transcend India's borders to become a global religion. What did these schools have in common? They all rejected the rigid caste system of Brahmanism. They refused to accept that people must live out their fates according to the social class into which they were born. Instead, they reclaimed dignity and opportunity for those who had long been deemed inferior. Within the current of the Shramana movement, a singular figure emerged, Prince Siddhartha Gautama of the kingdom of Kapilavastu, later known as Shakyamuni. Legend tells that he renounced his throne, wealth, and power in search of truth. He did not find answers in Brahmanic rituals, but through meditation and deep observation of human suffering. In the end, he attained enlightenment and taught what would be known as the Four Noble Truths, and the Noble Eightfold Path core principles of Buddhism, guiding people to overcome suffering, live virtuously, and seek liberation. Although Buddhism inherited the concepts of karma and reincarnation from Brahmanism, it introduced one radical shift: all sentient beings have the potential for rebirth and spiritual evolution regardless of their caste. No longer was reincarnation reserved for the upper three classes, nor was the lowest deemed doomed to a fixed fate. Because of this, Buddhism quickly became a beacon for forgotten souls. The nobility, especially kings from the Kshatriya class, strongly supported the new teachings, recognizing in them a tool to diminish the absolute power of the old priesthood. At the same time, the oppressed masses found hope in a doctrine of compassion, liberation, and equality. The idea that all beings are equal ignited a fire across the Ganges Valley, turning Buddhism into not just a religion, but a cultural revolution. The Warring States period of ancient India bore uncanny similarities to China's Spring and Autumn Warring States era. Both occurred during parallel centuries, and both represented a time of 100 schools of thought contending, a burst of philosophy, religion, and reform. Endless warfare was an inseparable part of this age. And just as the Qin state unified China in India, the kingdom of Magadha emerged as the first unifying force over the vast land. The ruler of Magadha was a king remembered in Indian history as King Ben, who established his capital at Rajagriha, City of Kings. While the Qin king in China relied on Xiangyang to reform politics, King Ben chose a different path. He supported Buddhism and curbed the power of the Brahmin class to elevate the royal institution. However, after his death, Magadha fell into internal chaos. It wasn't until a new ruler known as Mahatmananda ascended the throne that the Nanda dynasty was founded, ending the kingdom's inner turmoil. Under his reign, the Ganges Valley and parts of the Deccan Plateau were for the first time unified under a single banner. However, just as the East was settling into stability, the West fell into fresh turmoil. The Indus Valley, the former cradle of Dravidian civilization, was now invaded by foreign powers and gradually turned into a province under outside rule. Under the Maurya Empire, born from the Nanda dynasty's victories, ancient India seemed at last to enjoy a rare stability in the East. But that peace did not last. Driven by the desire to reclaim the ancestral heartland, the Indus Valley, once the core of Harappan civilization, the Mauryan armies immediately began marching westward. Yet this time they were not facing eastern intruders. Another stronger and unfamiliar power had arrived before them, the eastward advancing army of Alexander the Great, who had pushed deep into the Indian subcontinent with dreams of global dominion. Meeting Alexander was a seismic event. The Mauryan unification campaign had to halt when confronted by a fire they had never encountered. The Greek army, battle-hardened, exhausted, yet still deadly. Even so, Alexander's Indian ambition came to nothing. His soldiers, after an interminable march from Greece to this distant land, grew homesick, weary, and mutinous. With no other choice, Alexander withdrew, leaving a power vacuum, but also opening a new chapter in ancient Indian history. In Punjab, in the upper Indus region, lived a man named Chandragupta, later known in the West simply as Chandra. He was neither an heir apparent nor from the ruling class, yet he would become one of India's greatest kings. Chandra had fought the Greeks directly during Alexander's occupation. Through military talent, political acumen, and rising prestige, he won the trust of the local people. When the Greeks pulled out, many territories willingly submitted to him. Around 324 BCE, Chandra marched east, overthrew the weakening Nanda dynasty, and founded the Maurya dynasty, establishing his capital at Pataliputra. From there, a new empire arose, one that not only inherited the achievements of earlier kingdoms, but also aimed at true expansion. After Alexander's empire fragmented, many of his generals seized their own territories and turned them into small states. Among them, a man named Seleucus, called Kus here, held power in southern Afghanistan. But Chandra did not back down. After years of war, he defeated Kus, reclaimed this valuable land, and pushed the Mauryan Empire to the far northwest edge of the Indian subcontinent. The blow shook all of South Asia and made Western powers wary. Egypt, then under the Greek-ruled Ptolemaic dynasty, immediately sent envoys to Pataliputra to establish diplomatic relations with the rising empire. This marked the first time Indian civilization entered the international political map of the ancient world. If Chandra could be seen as the equivalent of Liu Bang, the founding emperor of the Han Dynasty, who replaced the Qin in China, then his grandson Ashoka resembled Emperor Wu of Han Liu Che, the ruler who brought his empire to the height of its power. Ashoka ascended the throne around 273 BCE. One of his most significant military achievements was the conquest of Kalinga on the Deccan Plateau. Though victorious, the war was bloody and left him with deep regret and sorrow. From that moment on, Ashoka renounced warfare and became the great protector of Buddhism. With his support, Buddhism not only became the state religion of ancient India, but also spread across Asia, crossing all borders. Politically, Ashoka established a centralized administrative system similar to that of China at the same time. Just as Emperor Wu created the inner court to oversee governance, Ashoka deployed a network of spies to monitor officials and local populations, safeguarding royal authority from the threats of corruption and rebellion. But that glory did not last forever. After Ashoka passed away, the Maurya Empire began to fragment. Internal conflicts along with unrelenting invasions from outside tribes led to the rapid collapse of the dynasty. The Yi people, originally nomadic tribes living in the Hexi corridor, western China, had once roamed between desert and grassland, living off livestock and a wandering life without a fixed home. But destiny changed after they were defeated by the Xiongnu. That war forced the Yi to retreat westward, sparking a large-scale wave of migration. This migration did not only affect the Yi, but also triggered a chain reaction. The Saka people who had been residing in the Pamir region were driven further south into the area that is now Afghanistan. There they displaced the weakening Greek powers that had held control since the post-Alexander era. However, the journey didn't stop there. The Yi continued pushing southward, forcing the Saka even deeper into the Indian subcontinent. The ancient heartland of the Indus civilization now saw a sequence of foreign powers replacing one another. When the Yi settled in Afghanistan, something extraordinary occurred. From a nomadic tribe, they gradually transformed into a sedentary agricultural society. They began to farm, build houses, and organize communities. During this transitional period, the Yi divided into 5 major tribes, each led by a chieftain known as a warlord. By the early 1st century CE, a talented leader named Kujula, referred to in Western texts as Kulakasp, did something unprecedented. He unified all 5 Yi tribes and founded the Kushan Empire. After him, his son and grandson continued the path of expansion. They advanced southward, conquering the region of Kashmir and extending the empire into the Indus Valley. During the reign of Kanishka, Kulakasp's grandson, the Kushan territory stretched from the Pamir Mountains in the north to the Narmada River in the south, and from the eastern border of Iran to the middle reaches of the Ganges River in the east. Under Kanishka's reign, the Kushan Empire was not only powerful in terms of territory, but also played a central role in the global context. Alongside the Roman Empire in the west, the Parthian Empire in the Middle East, and the Han Dynasty of China, Kushan was considered one of the 4 great empires of the classical world. Kanishka was not only a warrior, but also a promoter of religion. He actively supported Buddhism, commissioning the construction of numerous stupas and monasteries. It was during this period that Buddhism began to split into 2 major branches: Theravada Buddhism, which later spread widely southward into Southeast Asia. Mahayana Buddhism, which followed the Silk Road, crossed the deserts of Central Asia into China, and blended with Confucian thought, profoundly influencing Eastern culture. Despite possessing vast territories and considerable power, the Kushan Empire harbored seeds of internal division. It was a multi-ethnic empire where peoples of different languages, beliefs, and customs coexisted under a loosely unified structure. This diversity gave rise to strong centrifugal tendencies across many regions. In addition, the surrounding world was not standing still. During the Eastern Han period, the northern Xiongnu were defeated by the Chinese imperial court and began migrating westward. One group among them entered the territory of the Kushan Empire, also known as the Guisheng Empire. At first, they were defeated and driven back, but later they returned under a new name, the White Huns, one of the most brutal and dangerous groups referred to by the Persians as barbaric outsiders. The invasion of the White Huns delivered a fatal blow to the Kushan Empire. Already divided within the empire, now plunged into chaos. By the 3rd century CE, the Guisheng Empire collapsed and fragmented into numerous small states. Once again, the entire Indian subcontinent entered a period of fragmentation and turmoil. a multitude of small kingdoms arose vying for influence, a situation that lasted for centuries. Amid this chaos, in the upper Ganges region of northern India, a new lineage began to rise, the Gupta family. They conquered surrounding minor states and allied with the power-controlling Pataliputra, also known as Hwasur city, forming the two largest centers of power in the Ganges basin. By the year 308, the leader Chandra Gupta II married a princess from the Lich-Havi clan, uniting the two great houses and officially founding the Gupta dynasty. From then on, the Guptas waged successive campaigns of unification. By the reign of Chandra's grandson, Samudragupta, nearly all of northern India had been unified under a new empire, marking the beginning of a glorious era in Indian history known as the Golden Age. The success of the Guptas was largely due to the strong support of Hinduism, a revived form of the ancient Brahmanic religion. After a long period of foreign occupation, during which the Aryans gradually lost their dominance, this traditional religion re-emerged as a symbol of identity and the aspiration for national restoration. By this time, Brahmanism was no longer as rigid as it once was. After a long period of reflection and interaction with other ideologies such as Buddhism and Jainism, it began to absorb folk beliefs, becoming more inclusive and syncretic. At the same time, the development of productive forces and the emergence of a landlord class, the early seeds of a feudal society, transformed the social structure. Farmers were no longer independent individuals. They increasingly came under the control of landlords and the new ruling elite. As agricultural production advanced, a new social class gradually emerged, the landowning class. They held land and demanded taxes and labor obligations from the peasants. In this social system, the caste structure originally established by Brahmanism became the ideal tool to protect the interests of the new ruling class. Thus, Brahmanism evolved and entered a new stage, what could be called version 2.0, transforming into Hinduism, a highly structured religion that merged folk beliefs, the doctrine of reincarnation, and political principles of power and legitimacy. Previously, Buddhism had been the state religion of the Kushan Empire. But when Aryan nobles who had long been marginalized rose up and resisted central authority, they adopted Hinduism as a banner for ideological unification, confronting the Guishong Empire. As a result, by the time the Gupta dynasty rose to power, Hinduism had replaced Buddhism and returned as the dominant religion of the Indian subcontinent. Though the Gupta kings followed Hinduism, they did not impose their beliefs. On the contrary, they showed remarkable tolerance toward other religions. During the reign of Samudragupta, often referred to as the Sun King, a famous Chinese monk named Faxian from the Eastern Jin dynasty arrived in India to seek scriptures. Faxian was received with great honor, a testament to the openness of Indian culture during this period. However, peace did not last. After the Guptas defeated the remnants of the Kushan Empire, the White Huns, a new force from the north, invaded deep into northern India. This invasion led to the collapse of the Gupta dynasty. The White Huns established a new state called the Hephthalite Empire, also known as the state of Yada. But they too did not last long. The Persians and the Turks successively invaded and wiped out Yada, throwing India back into a cycle of conflict and fragmentation. After decades of warfare in northern India, the situation gradually calmed, leaving only four powerful kingdoms, Tanisha, Mukhi Gujarat, and Mawa. The first two formed one alliance, while the latter two formed another. The war between these two alliances dragged on for many years. Eventually, a young king of Tanisha, named Harsha, affectionately known as Haha, ascended the throne and changed the tide. Haha launched a powerful campaign against Gujarat and Mawa. He won a resounding victory, unifying all three kingdoms, and adopted the name Haha, meaning joy and happiness, as the symbol of the new dynasty. His former ally Mukhi had no way out and was forced to submit. Thus, the Tanisha Empire was born, stretching from Bengal in the east to Sindh in the west, from the Himalayas in the north to the Narmada River in the south, effectively unifying nearly the entire subcontinent. During Harsha's reign, the renowned monk from the Tang dynasty Xuanzang arrived at the capital Kanyakubja, Kujni city. Xuanzang came not only to pay homage but also to preach and learn. His journey would later be dramatized in the classic tale Journey to the West. Harsha hosted a grand Vajrasana conference for Xuanzang, where India's major religious schools, Hinduism, Jainism, and Theravada Buddhism, engaged in theological debate. Before thousands of monks and scholars, Xuanzang demonstrated profound knowledge and eloquence. The debate lasted 18 days and ended with his triumph over all opposing arguments. From that point on, Xuanzang was honored as the Mahayana Celestial, a great propagator of Mahayana Buddhism. Harsha became his fervent supporter, organizing another 75-day conference before Xuanzang left India, not for debate this time, but simply to listen and honor his wisdom. Just a few years after Xuanzang left India, Harsha passed away. Without a strong successor, the Tanisha Empire quickly fragmented. Regional vassal rulers rose up, declared independence, and India once again entered a prolonged period of division. For several centuries thereafter, foreign invaders arrived in waves: the Arabs, the Guz-Oghuz Turks, and then the Turks, all bringing with them fire, steel, and the Islamic faith. Cities along the Ganges River Valley were plundered, and ancient lands changed hands repeatedly. In the early 13th century, a Muslim Turkish general named Ibrahim proclaimed himself Sultan and seized Delhi, establishing the Delhi Sultanate, the first Islamic dynasty in northern India. The Sultanate swiftly unified the entire northern region, but internal divisions plagued the ruling class. Over the course of its more than 300-year existence, the Sultanate saw multiple dynasties: the slave dynasty, Khilji Tughlaq Sayyid, and finally Lodi, each lasting only around 50 years on average. Under the Sultanate, Muslims were exempt from many taxes, while Hindus had to pay pilgrimage taxes and were at times forcibly converted. This led to the rapid spread of Islam, making it the second largest religion in India. Even during the height of the Delhi Sultanate's power, a Turco-Mongol noble named Timur, the Lame better known as Tamerlane, had already established his empire in Central Asia. In the late 14th century, Timur invaded India. In 1398, he marched into Delhi and carried out a horrific massacre. The capital was burned to the ground, its people enslaved, and the entire military structure of the Delhi Sultanate was utterly destroyed. This was one of the most catastrophic events in the history of northern India, not only destabilizing the ruling dynasty at its roots, but also paving the way for a new rising power, the Mughal Empire. In 1526, Babur, a descendant of both Genghis Khan and Timur, crossed the Hindu Kush mountains, bringing with him the fierce spirit of the Central Asian steppes. In northern India, he defeated a coalition of local Muslim kingdoms and established a new empire. To distinguish it from the original Mongol Empire in Asia, historians refer to the state founded by Babur in India as the Mughal Empire. After Babur's death, the young empire was quickly overthrown by Afghan forces. But Indian history is never short of unexpected turns. Humayun Babur's son, with aid from the Persian Empire, reclaimed his throne and restored the Mughal dynasty after more than a decade in exile. After Humayun, the Mughal crown passed to his exceptional son Akbar. Akbar was not only a fearless warrior, but also a brilliant reformer. He personally led military campaigns, crushing the once powerful Islamic kingdoms, and gradually built an empire stretching from Bengal to the Chinese frontier, from northern Afghanistan all the way to the Vindhya Mountains in the south. This was the first time since the golden age of the Delhi Sultanate that the entire South Asian subcontinent was once again unified under such a powerful dynasty. What made Akbar immortal in the hearts of the people was not only his military victories, but also his unprecedented policy of religious tolerance. He abolished the repressive decrees of the Sultanate era and allowed Hindus, Muslims, and even Christian missionaries from Portugal to practice their faiths freely in India. Moreover, he implemented a policy of recruiting the talented regardless of origin. Whether Hindu, Muslim, or Christian, so long as one had ability and loyalty, they were welcomed and employed in the Mughal administration. It is no surprise that Indians honor Akbar alongside Emperor Ashoka of the Maurya Empire and Harsha of the Tanisha dynasty as one of the three greatest kings in their history. After Akbar's death, the throne passed to Jahangir, and then to Shah Jahan, Akbar's grandson. It was Shah Jahan who built the Taj Mahal, one of the seven wonders of the world, as an eternal symbol of love for his late wife Mumtaz Mahal. But darkness soon followed. In 1658, his son Aurangzeb, a radical and ambitious man, staged a coup, overthrew his three brothers, imprisoned his own father, and abandoned the policies of tolerance established by his predecessors. Aurangzeb pursued an aggressive policy of Islamicization, which caused deep divisions within the empire. Uprisings broke out across the realm, public loyalty disintegrated, and the once brilliant Mughal glory began to fade. As the Mughal Empire gradually weakened, European powers, Britain, France, Portugal, and the Netherlands began arriving in India. Initially, they came to trade, but soon they established trading posts in Surat, Bombay, Mumbai, and Calcutta, Kolkata, gradually gaining a foothold in the vast territory. The internal fractures within the Mughal Empire led to continual conflicts among regional lords and princes. By 1761, in the Third Battle of Panipat, Afghan forces from the north swept in, defeated the Mughal army, plundered Delhi, and shattered the last hope of resisting the advancing wave of Western invasion. From that point on, India officially entered the colonial era. After defeating the French in the 7 Years' War, the British seized all of France's colonial possessions in India, solidifying their dominance. They then launched 4 wars against the Kingdom of Mysore, 3 against the Maratha Confederacy, and swiftly occupied all of southern and central India. In the north, the British East India Company did not rely heavily on military campaigns. Instead, they adopted a strategy of political persuasion, economic bribery, and military intimidation. One by one, small princely states and regional kingdoms fell under British control. It was no longer conquest by sword and gun, but a new form of colonization by wealth and calculation, a subtle and deeply rooted kind of imperialism. When the British completed their conquest of Punjab, the last unconquered territory, the final emperor of the Mughal Empire, was reduced to nothing more than a puppet. From that moment onward, the entire Indian subcontinent fell into British hands, officially becoming a colony of the British Empire. Although they held complete authority on paper, the British left intact a network of native princes, Indian nobles who still ruled their own princely states. To expand territory and tighten control over tax revenues, the British Governor-General in India, Lord Dalhousie, introduced what was called the Doctrine of Lapse. According to this doctrine, if any local ruler died without a direct heir, the land and revenue of that territory would be annexed by the East India Company. Later, he also used the excuse of poor governance to directly confiscate the properties of Hindu and Muslim temples, which enraged both the nobility and the religious elite. In the early days of their rule, the British recruited Indians as mercenaries, promising high pay and special privileges. But once power was consolidated, they cut benefits and even forced Indian soldiers to convert to Christianity. British officers treated them with discrimination and humiliation, often pushing them to the front lines during military campaigns, even in operations in China. Resentment built silently among the ranks of Indian soldiers until a new kind of cartridge was introduced. The cartridge was greased with a mixture of pig and cow fat. To use it, soldiers had to bite open the paper wrapper and act deeply offensive to both Hindus who revere cows and Muslims who are forbidden from consuming pork. In May 1857, a rebellion broke out at the Meerut barracks and rapidly spread across the country. The mutinous soldiers declared the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah II, as the rightful emperor of India and called upon all people, regardless of religion, to rise up in resistance. The Indian princes, already discontented, immediately responded to the call. The 1857 rebellion, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, spread like wildfire across the dry grass of colonial India. However, the British military, with superior weapons and greater numbers, responded with brutal suppression. Bahadur Shah II was exiled and the Mughal Empire came to an official end. Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India, ending the role of the East India Company and ushering India into the era of direct British rule. The British intensified their exploitation of India's natural resources and manpower, but they also introduced railroads, factories, schools, and Western Enlightenment ideals. A new Indian middle class began to emerge, composed of intellectuals, entrepreneurs, and politicians who embraced the ideas of modernization. They founded organizations such as the Arya Samaj, the All India Muslim League, and most notably the Indian National Congress. But all calls for reform were ignored. When World War I broke out, the British government promised that if India supported the war effort, it would be granted self-rule afterward. But once the war ended, the British broke their promise. On the contrary, they intensified repression. On April 13, 1919, in Amritsar, British troops massacred hundreds of unarmed civilians at a peaceful gathering. This event, known as the Jallianwala Bagh Massacre, became the spark that ignited a new wave of resistance. Under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian people launched a nonviolent civil disobedience movement, strikes, boycotts of British goods tax resistance, all powered by moral strength. Although it didn't force the British to leave immediately, the foundations of colonial rule began to tremble. After World War II, the British Empire was severely weakened, and in 1946, Indian sailors in Mumbai could no longer endure the oppression. They launched a revolt which led to the Royal Indian Navy mutiny spreading nationwide. The Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, once rivals, joined forces organizing strikes and armed resistance across the country. Faced with an unstoppable wave of uprisings, the British government was forced to enter negotiations. The result was the Mountbatten Plan proposed by the last British Viceroy of India, which divided the entire colony into two new nations based on religion: India, with a Hindu majority, and Pakistan, with a Muslim majority. The 562 princely states were given the right to choose which country to join. On August 14, 1947, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan was born. Just one day later, India officially declared its independence. On January 26, 1950, the Republic of India was formally established. From a land once fragmented, invaded, and ruled by countless empires from Alexander the Great to the Mongols, from the Sakas to the British, India had risen like a phoenix, carrying within it the breath of 5,000 years of history. But this is not the end of the story. The three Indo-Pakistani wars, the bloody conflict in Kashmir, and ongoing internal tensions, those are tales meant for another chapter.